So, me caveman, let's go. Number 11. Ayahuasca. Start with a paradox that should not exist. Take two plants from the Amazon rainforest. Neither one, taken alone, will do much of anything to your mind. But combine them in the right way, and they open a door in human consciousness that stays open for hours. Somebody, deep in prehistory, worked this out, and the chemistry involved is so specific that it looks less like folk medicine and more like a laboratory result. The brew is called Ayahuasca, a Quechua word meaning roughly the vine of the soul. It is a decoction of the woody vine Banisteriopsis cayapi, combined with a second plant, usually the shrub chacruna or the vine chagrapanga, that carries the compound DMT. Here's the problem those ancient chemists had to solve, without knowing any of the words for it. When you swallow DMT, an enzyme in your gut called monoamine oxidase destroys it before it can ever reach your brain. On its own, the leaf is useless when eaten. The vine is the key. Banisteriopsis cayapi is rich in compounds called harmine and harmaline, and these molecules temporarily switch off that gut enzyme. With the enzyme silenced, the DMT survives, crosses into the brain, and acts on the serotonin receptors that shape perception. A third vine compound adds its own effect on serotonin. Two plants, one deliberate combination, and a chemical lock is picked. For a long time, this was known only from living Amazonian traditions. Then archaeology caught up. In a rock shelter called Cueva del Chileno, in the high Lipes region of southwestern Bolivia, a team led by Melanie Miller recovered a ritual bundle, reported in the journal PNAS in 2019. Inside was a pouch stitched together from 3 fox snouts. When that pouch was analyzed by mass spectrometry, it tested positive for a remarkable cocktail. Harmine. DMT, cocaine. A cocaine breakdown product. And bufotenine. The leather bundle was radiocarbon dated to between roughly 900 and 1100 years ago, during the slow decline of the Tiwanaku state. This is the earliest chemical evidence anywhere for combining an enzyme-blocking plant with a tryptamine plant, the exact pharmacological trick that makes ayahuasca work. But the science is careful, and the debate is real. The mainstream view holds that these combined brews are genuinely ancient. Miller herself cautions that the chemistry only proves the plants were possessed and possibly mixed, not that a boiled liquid was brewed the way it is today. The anthropologist Bernd Brabeck de Mori goes further, arguing from language that the brew might be less than 500 years old, spreading only recently. And at the fringe, the writer Terence McKenna claimed tryptamines drove the evolution of human thought itself, an idea mainstream science rejects. What nobody disputes is that bufotenine in that pouch points to a second plant, one whose delivery technology became a trade network of its own. Number 10. Anadenanthera Snuff. That bufotenine came from the seeds of trees in the genus Anadenanthera, and the snuff made from them may be the oldest evidence of the human drive to build technology purely for altering the mind. The seeds are roasted and ground into a powder known by many names: yopo, cohoba, vilca, sibyl. A single gram of seed can carry around 74 milligrams of bufotenine, along with smaller amounts of DMT and a close chemical relative. This is not a mild substance. The oldest firmly dated evidence comes from a cave called Inca Cueva 4 in the high Puna of northwestern Argentina, nearly 4,000 meters above sea level. There, archaeologists found smoking pipes made of puma bone, packed with Anadenanthera seeds, radiocarbon dated to roughly 4,000 years ago. The leading scholar of this snuff complex, Constantino Manuel Torres, has traced its signature artifacts across the Andes. The kit is unmistakable. A carved wooden or stone tray to hold the powder, paired with a tube of bird bone or wood to blow it deep into the nose. These kits spread with the great Andean states. Trays from San Pedro de Atacama in northern Chile match the Tiwanaku era, roughly 1,500 years ago. At the temple of Chavin de Huantar, Torres read a fanged stone deity as a portrait of the Vilca plant itself. And in 2025, a study in PNAS by Daniel Contreras and colleagues settled part of the argument. Bone tubes recovered from sealed chambers deep inside, Chavin tested positive for DMT, bufotenine, and nicotine. The chemistry was finally caught in the artifact. The practice reached the sea. In the Caribbean, the Taíno people performed the cohoba ceremony, inhaling the ground seeds through a Y-shaped tube while seated on carved wooden stools, purging first to purify the body before speaking with ancestral spirits. Painted caves in the Dominican Republic still show figures snuffing through tubes. Alexander von Humboldt, traveling the Orinoco around 1800, watched the Otomac people mix the seed paste with lime burned from snail shells. That lime was not decoration. It was chemistry. The alkaline powder frees the active compounds so the body can absorb them, adding nothing psychoactive of its own. But debate surrounds nearly every part of this story. Is bufotenine even truly visionary? Early prison experiments in the 1950s found it mostly unpleasant and near toxic, while the chemist Jonathan Ott, self-experimenting decades later, found it clearly visionary at the right dose. Archaeologists still argue whether Chavin art shows this snuff or a mescaline cactus, and popular writers link the drug to toad venom and a mystical third eye, a claim the plant chemistry simply does not support. What is certain is that some of humanity's oldest sacred substances left carved stone portraits. The only question was which mushroom they showed. Number 9. Teonanácatl Mushrooms. The Aztecs had a name for them. Teonanácatl, which translates as the flesh of the gods, recorded in the 16th century by the Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún, working with Nahua scholars. But the reverence was far older than the Aztecs, and it was carved in stone. In highland Guatemala and southern Mexico, archaeologists have found strange carved objects known as mushroom stones, effigies shaped like a mushroom with a face or figure at the base. From a cemetery at Caminaljuyu, on the edge of modern Guatemala City, came a cache of 9 miniature mushroom stones paired with 9 tiny grinding stones, dated to between about 1,000 and 500 years before the Common Era. The archaeologist Stefan de Borhegi cataloged these effigies and argued the cult reached back 3,000 years or more. The modern world learned of the living tradition in 1957, when the banker and amateur mycologist Gordon Wasson published an account in Life magazine of a night ceremony he attended in Oaxaca, led by the Mazatec healer Maria Sabina. The following year, the Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann isolated the active compounds, naming them psilocybin and psilocin. Psilocybin is what you eat, but the body strips away part of the molecule to produce psilocin, the compound that actually acts on the brain, at the same serotonin receptor as DMT. The body finishes the chemistry the mushroom started. The debates here run deep into prehistory. On a rock wall in eastern Spain, the Selva Pascuala mural shows a row of 13 small shapes that 2 researchers argued in 2011 depict a local psilocybin mushroom. Other scholars see only ambiguous forms. In the Sahara, prehistoric rock art at Tassili Najar, with its strange bee-faced figures, has been read as a mushroom cult, while critics counter that the images may be sheep or stylized modern copies. And once again, McKenna's claim that mushrooms drove human evolution hovers at the edges, rejected by mainstream science for lack of any evidence. Wasson himself argued separately that the sacred drink of the ancient Vedic hymns was not a mushroom like these at all, but the red and white fly agaric. What is beyond doubt is the cultural aftershock. Wasson's article helped send a generation south in search of visions, and in the last decade, the compound has come full circle. Regulators have granted it breakthrough status for treatment-resistant depression, and cities and states have moved to permit its therapeutic use, with clinical trials reporting depression scores cut by more than half in a single week. Across the Atlantic, meanwhile, the oldest surviving drug specimen in the Americas was quietly drying in a Texas cave. Number 8. Peyote. It is small, round, spineless, and easy to overlook, a cactus that grows low to the ground in the deserts of northern Mexico and southern Texas. Its name is peyote, and inside it is the compound mescaline, and peyote holds a distinction no other drug on this list can match. It gave us the oldest physical drug specimen ever recovered in the Americas. In a place called Shumla Cave, in the lower Pecos region of Texas, researchers recovered 2 dried peyote buttons. When a team led by Jesus Brun and Hesham El Sidi radiocarbon dated them, published in 2005, the buttons came back at roughly 5,700 years old. That is older than the pyramids of Egypt. And when the ancient tissue was analyzed by chromatography, it still tested positive for mescaline. The drug was not just present 5,700 years ago. It was chemically detectable across all that time. The science of mescaline is a story in itself. The German chemist Arthur Hefter isolated it in 1897, the first pure psychedelic compound ever extracted from a plant, and he confirmed its power by dosing himself. Another chemist synthesized it from scratch in 1919. In dried peyote, mescaline makes up a few percent of the tissue, and a dose runs to a few hundred milligrams, producing effects that can last 8 to 12 hours. Peyote grows painfully slowly, and it is now classed as vulnerable, threatened by overharvest. Yet the tradition remains fiercely alive. The Wixárika, or Huichol, people undertake an annual pilgrimage of some 800 kilometers to a sacred desert to gather the cactus they call hikuri. In the United States, ceremonial peyote use became organized in the Native American Church, formally incorporated in Oklahoma in 1918, with the Comanche leader Quanah Parker among its founders. That religious use was tested at the highest level. In 1990, the Supreme Court ruled that a state could deny benefits to men fired for sacramental peyote use, a decision Congress answered 4 years later by protecting traditional native peyote ceremonies nationwide. Even the antiquity is debated. The 2005 study actually narrowed older, looser claims that peyote use stretched back 7 to 10,000 years. The archaeologist Carolyn Boyd reads a great painted mural in the region as a prescription for ritual tied to peyote, but she refuses to call it a literal drug vision, noting that other plants like datura were also used. Some historians argue organized peyote religion is surprisingly recent, spreading north only in the last few centuries. What ties peyote to the next item is a single molecule, because the very same mescaline was being carved into stone temples 6,000 kilometers to the south. Number 7. The San Pedro cactus. In the high Andes grows a tall, ribbed, columnar cactus called San Pedro. Unlike the slow desert peyote, it shoots upward fast, and it carries the same compound, mescaline. Its potency varies wildly from plant to plant by a factor of nearly 100, and it sits at the center of one of the most important religious sites in the ancient Americas. That site is Chavin de Huantar, high in the Peruvian Andes, begun around 3,200 years ago and flourishing for centuries before the Inca existed. Chavin is a labyrinth of stone galleries and plazas, and its art is saturated with a fanged, staring, supernatural imagery. At its heart stands the Lanzon, a granite monolith more than 4 meters tall, carved as a fanged deity, still fixed in place deep inside the old temple. Nearby, an excavation in 1972 uncovered a carved stela, showing a figure gripping a 4-ribbed San Pedro stalk in its hand. The building itself seems designed to overwhelm the senses. Carved stone heads project from the temple walls, and they show a transformation. Human faces sprout fangs and stream mucus from the nose, the unmistakable physical sign of taking a powerful snuff. One head sprouts San Pedro stalks from its very eyes. The archaeologist Richard Berger, whose survey remains authoritative, concluded that psychoactive substances were central to everything Chavin was. Then came the twist. For decades, the assumption was that San Pedro and its mescaline were the temple's sacrament. But that 2025 chemical study of the sealed bone tubes found DMT, bufotenine, and nicotine, the fingerprints of the snuff and of wild tobacco, not mescaline. So now researchers debate a genuine puzzle. Was San Pedro the actual drug of Chavin, or was it a powerful symbol carved everywhere while the snuff did the chemical work? The earliest claimed San Pedro remains, from a cave called Guitarrero, are dated as far back as 8,000 years. But skeptics note that plant material can migrate downward through soil and contaminate older layers. And at the fringe, writers like Graham Hancock fold Andean ritual into a lost global civilization, a claim archaeologists reject. What is not in doubt is the continuity. In northern Peru today, healers still run all-night ceremonies with the same cactus, which they call huachuma, at sacred mountain lagoons. And the temple's designers understood theater. Excavators recovered around 20 conch shell trumpets from a gallery, instruments whose sound would have echoed through the stone passages, amplifying whatever the drug had begun. One plant helped bind together the first great religious tradition of the Andes. And half a world away, a fungus on a stalk of grain may have shaped the mind of Greece. Number 6. The Eleusinian Kykeon. For nearly 2,000 years, the ancient Greeks kept a secret so well guarded that revealing it could carry a death sentence. Every year, initiates traveled to a sanctuary at Eleusis, near Athens, drank a mysterious potion called the Kykeon, and emerged changed, claiming to have lost their fear of death. The rite ran until a Roman emperor suppressed it around 1600 years ago. And the great question is, what was in the cup? The only ancient recipe, preserved in a hymn to the goddess Demeter, lists barley, water, and mint. That should do nothing. But one hypothesis, laid out in 1978 in a book called The Road to Eleusis, proposed something startling. Barley in the ancient Mediterranean was frequently infected with a fungus called ergot, which grows as a dark, hardened spur on the grain. Ergot contains alkaloids built on lysergic acid, the very same chemical backbone from which the chemist Albert Hofmann had synthesized LSD in 1938. Hofmann was one of the book's 3 authors. The proposed mechanism was elegant. Some of ergot's compounds dissolve in water, while its most poisonous ones do not. A priestess who steeped the fungus in water could, in theory, draw off a psychoactive drink while leaving the deadly poisons behind. That poison was no small matter. Throughout the Middle Ages, ergot-contaminated bread caused terrifying epidemics, burning limbs black with gangrene and driving victims into convulsions, a horror they called St. Anthony's fire. Physical evidence turned up in Spain, at a sanctuary linked to the same Greek goddesses, where an archaeobotanist reported ergot inside a ceremonial cup and in the dental tartar of a young man, alongside traces of barley beer. But the skeptics push back hard. Many argue the water-soluble compounds are not strongly hallucinogenic on their own. Others point out that separating the safe alkaloids from the poisons cleanly is extremely difficult, making it hard to imagine safely dosing thousands of initiates for centuries. Rival theories propose mushrooms, or opium, or that the whole experience needed no drug at all, only fasting, darkness, and staging. Then, very recently, chemists tested the idea directly. Boiling ground ergot in a strong alkaline solution for a couple of hours, they found, destroyed most of the poison, and left behind a modest but real dose of a psychoactive compound related to LSD. The experiment proved only that such a brew was technically possible in antiquity, not that it was actually used. The debate, more than 40 years old, remains unsettled, and the next substance never caused a single vision, yet it may be the most widely chewed drug in all of human history. Number 5. Betel Nut. Across South and Southeast Asia and out into the Pacific, hundreds of millions of people share a habit that turns their saliva blood red and stains their teeth a deep rust. They are chewing betel, and it is one of the most widely used psychoactive substances on Earth, ranking behind only caffeine, alcohol, and nicotine. A betel quid is an assembly. The seed of the areca palm, which carries a stimulant compound, is wrapped in the leaf of a pepper plant and smeared with slaked lime. That lime does the same chemical job as in the Andes, shifting the acidity so the drug is absorbed and even converting it into a second active compound that prolongs the effect. The result is a mild, warm stimulation, a lift comparable in register to a cigarette. The oldest clear evidence comes from Duyung Cave on the island of Palawan in the Philippines, excavated by Robert Fox in the 1960s. There lay a man buried in a flexed position, dated to roughly 4,600 years ago. His teeth were stained in the telltale way, and among his grave goods was a shell container still holding lime. Older plant traces of areca and pepper appear at Spirit Cave in Thailand, in layers many thousands of years older still. Betel's story is bound to one of the greatest migrations in human history. The areca palm shows its richest diversity in the Philippines, likely its homeland, and the chewing habit seems to have crystallized there just as the Austronesian expansion began, around 5,000 years ago. From there, it rode outrigger canoes across the map. It reached Micronesia, South Asia, and mainland Southeast Asia over the following millennia, and finally, distant Madagascar only about 600 years ago. It traveled with the seafaring Lapita culture, yet it never crossed into Polynesia, where it appears to have been displaced by another drug plant, kava. Modern science adds a sharper edge. Betel is now classified as a top-tier human carcinogen, causing oral cancers, with the World Health Organization estimating more than 600 million users. A 2025 study using chemical analysis of dental tartar from Bronze Age Thailand detected the drug in a woman where no staining survived, suggesting the habit may be even more widespread in the record than stained teeth alone reveal. The debates concern where it truly began and how old it really is. But betel binds a stimulant to the peopling of a third of the planet's islands. The next plant was not chewed or smoked. It was drunk. And it became money. Number 4. Cacao. Chocolate feels like the least dangerous item imaginable, but strip away the sugar and you find a genuine drug plant. Cacao seeds carry 2 stimulant compounds, theobromine and caffeine, and cacao is the only plant of the ancient Americas to contain both. That chemical pairing is a fingerprint, and it lets archaeologists identify ancient cacao with certainty wherever a residue survives. For a long time, the story began in Mexico, with the Maya and the Aztecs. Then, the whole map was redrawn. At a site called Santa Ana la Florida, in the upper Amazon of southeastern Ecuador, a study published in 2018 found 3 independent lines of evidence for cacao, starch grains, absorbed theobromine, and ancient DNA, dating to roughly 5,300 years ago. That is about 1,500 years earlier than anything in Mesoamerica. The people who first used cacao lived not in Mexico, but in the Amazonian foothills of the Andes, and they moved it along the same trade routes that carried sacred seashells inland. From those deep origins, cacao spread north. Confirmed residues appear in Mexico, and then among the early Maya, in spouted vessels dated to around 2,600 years ago. The genetics show that the prized Mesoamerican variety was strongly domesticated about 3,600 years ago and carried north from near Ecuador. And once in Mesoamerica, cacao became far more than a drink. Among the classic Maya and the later Aztecs, whole cacao beans functioned as money. People paid tribute in them, bought goods with them, and counted them out like coins. The debates are lively. The Ecuadorian discovery overturned the long-held belief that cacao was first domesticated in Mesoamerica, a reversal still being digested by specialists. Scholars argue over whether those earliest Amazonian residues prove a deliberately processed chocolate drink or just early use of a wild plant. Even the currency question has nuance. The anthropologist David Friedel calls the beans almost certainly a currency, while cautioning that maize and cloth competed as money, so the popular idea that a cacao crop failure could crash the Maya economy is overstated. Ecuador, for its part, now officially promotes itself as the birthplace of chocolate, a national claim some archaeologists think runs ahead of the evidence. What is clear is that a mood-altering drink became one of the ancient world's first standards of value. The next leaf did the same for empires, and it was chewed, not brewed. Number 3. Coca leaf. High in the Andes, people have chewed the leaf of the coca shrub for thousands of years, tucking a wad into the cheek to release a mild stimulant that dulls hunger, eases fatigue, and softens the crushing effects of altitude. The leaf carries a small amount of the cocaine alkaloid, far diluted from the refined drug, and it has been woven into Andean life for so long that it predates almost every civilization of the region. The oldest firm evidence comes from the Nanchoc Valley of northern Peru, where the archaeologist Tom Dillahay found coca leaves on ancient house floors alongside pieces of calcite, dated to around 8,000 years ago. That discovery, published in 2010, pushed the secure origin of coca chewing back by roughly 3,000 years. And it revealed something social. The calcite is an alkaline additive, the same lime trick again, and at Nanchoc, there were rock-lined pits built to heat stone and produce that powdered lime. Specialists were making and supplying it communally, just as organized farming was taking hold. Coca use was a coordinated activity from very early on. Direct proof of consumption comes from the dead. Researchers testing the hair of Andean mummies detected the chemical breakdown products of cocaine in bodies spanning from around 4,000 years ago down to the eve of European contact. Under the Inca, coca became an instrument of the state. It moved through the labor tax system, was handed out at feasts to bind loyalty, and was reserved as an elite offering. Its darkest role appears in the analysis of child sacrifice victims found frozen on Andean peaks, whose hair showed they had been given coca and other psychoactive drugs in the weeks before their deaths. The scientific debates now center on the plant's origins. One genetic study argues the cultivated cocas were domesticated 2 or 3 separate times from a single wild ancestor. An older model proposed 2 entirely distinct wild origins, and a more recent analysis suggests the truth is messier still, a tangled history of ancient interbreeding rather than clean separate events. There is even an old argument that coca is really a food, since the leaf is rich in calories, protein, calcium, and vitamins, though controlled studies fail to confirm the folk claim that it prevents altitude sickness. Whatever the resolution, coca was sacred long before the Inca, appears in ancient art across the region, and remains at the heart of a modern dispute, ever since chemists isolated pure cocaine from the leaf in 1860 and split the mild plant forever from the refined drug. The next plant is the deepest human-drug relationship yet found, older than farming itself. Number 2. Tobacco. We think of tobacco as a modern scourge, a commercial product that conquered the world after Columbus. But the human relationship with this plant is astonishingly deep, and it begins not with farmers, but with Ice Age hunters. Tobacco belongs to a family of plants that carry nicotine, a compound so potent it doubles as a natural insecticide, a stimulant, and at high doses, a poison. The record-breaking evidence comes from the Wishbone site on the flats of the Great Salt Lake Desert in Utah. In an ancient hearth, archaeologists led by Darren Duke recovered 4 charred seeds of wild desert tobacco, and the hearth dated to roughly 12,300 years ago. Published in 2021, this pushed the earliest known human use of tobacco back by around 9,000 years in a single stroke. The hearth held duck bones and stone tools of the terminal ice age, and crucially, that species of tobacco does not grow in the surrounding marsh. Someone carried it in. Before Utah, the oldest firm evidence had been chemical, nicotine detected in a smoking tube from Alabama a few thousand years old, and in ancient pipes on the northwestern plateau. Domesticated tobacco, meanwhile, came later, and from the south, bred in the Andes of South America some 6,000 to 8,000 years ago. One of its main species, a natural hybrid of 2 wild plants that crossed before humans ever cultivated it. From there, it spread north, reaching what is now the United States thousands of years after those Ice Age foragers at Wishbone. The debates are pointed. Do 4 charred seeds prove intoxicant use, or could they be food scraps, or accidental burning? With no pipe at Wishbone, did those foragers smoke the plant, or chew it, or suck it? And a bolder question hangs over the whole field. Was tobacco perhaps domesticated before maize, its pursuit helping to draw people toward farming? The idea is provocative and unproven. What is certain is that indigenous American tobacco use was overwhelmingly sacred, taken in trance-inducing doses far stronger than any modern cigarette, for divination and healing, a world away from the commercial addiction that came later. The plant only became a global commodity after 1492, when a French diplomat named Nicot lent his name to the plant and to nicotine itself. And that reframes tobacco entirely as one of the oldest and deepest bonds between a human being and a drug plant anywhere on Earth. But the deepest driver of all may not have altered a single mind through vision. It may have built farming itself. Number 1. Fermented alcohol. Here is the idea that ends the countdown, and it is the most radical of all. What if civilization did not begin because people got hungry for bread, but because they got thirsty for beer? What if the single, most transformative drug in human history is the oldest and most familiar one, alcohol? And what if the desire for it helped coax our ancestors into farming in the first place? Alcohol is the product of fermentation, in which yeast converts sugar into ethanol. It requires almost nothing to happen, only sugar, water, and wild yeast in the air, which is why it appears independently all over the ancient world. The keystone discovery came from a Neolithic village called Jiahu in Henan, China. There, the researcher Patrick McGovern chemically analyzed pottery residues and identified, in a study published in 2004, a fermented drink of rice, honey, and hawthorn fruit or wild grape brewed around 9,000 years ago. A modern brewery even recreated the recipe, a strong amber grog at roughly 10% alcohol. Older evidence reaches back further still. At Rakafet Cave on Mount Carmel in Israel, Stanford researchers found starch residues in stone mortars, suggesting cereal beer was being brewed some 13,000 years ago by the Natufian hunter-gatherers, thousands of years before anyone domesticated a single grain. They reconstructed a 3-stage process of malting, mashing, and fermenting. And at the great ritual site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, huge limestone vessels holding up to 160 liters were found with a chemical residue that forms when grain is soaked and fermented, though researchers stress this signal is only tentative. This is where the debate becomes profound. As far back as 1953, a scholar proposed that thirst for beer, not hunger for bread, drove the earliest cereal cultivation. The archaeologist who ran that famous symposium remained skeptical, insisting bread came first, and the argument has never been settled. Others suggest the real driver was feasting, that communal celebrations demanding vast quantities of beer created the pressure to farm grain at scale. And the deepest version of the idea reaches back millions of years to the drunken monkey hypothesis, which proposes that our attraction to alcohol descends from primate ancestors who followed the scent of ethanol to find ripe fruit. Genetics supports a piece of this, an ancient mutation in our lineage, some 10 million years old, that made our ancestors far better at metabolizing alcohol. 3 separate regions of the ancient world, from China to the Levant to Anatolia, all point toward the same startling possibility. Fermentation may have been so valuable, so worth the labor, that it helped domesticate the grain, and in a sense, helped domesticate us. Step back from the 11, and a hidden order appears. These substances came from separate continents and unconnected peoples, yet they cluster into a handful of chemical families. The visionary drugs, the DMT of ayahuasca, the bufotenine of snuff, the psilocin of mushrooms, all act on the same serotonin receptor in the brain. Mescaline, the compound of both peyote and San Pedro, is one molecule that 2 continents discovered independently. The stimulants form their own family: the nicotine of tobacco, the cocaine of coca, the ericoline of betel, the theobromine of cacao, a graded scale of everyday lift. That distant peoples kept finding the same molecules is not coincidence. The plants had their own reasons for making them. Nicotine and caffeine evolved as poisons to kill insects, and humans simply repurposed those chemical weapons. What separated medicine from intoxication from death was almost always dose, and the human response was strikingly consistent everywhere. The visions were contained by ritual, guided by preparation, shaped by fasting and purging, and carried on sound, the sung icaros of the Amazon, the conch trumpets of the Andes. Set and setting, the modern terms for expectation and environment, turn out to be ancient wisdom. The shaman was humanity's first pharmacologist, and to these ancient peoples, the very idea of a drug as a thing, separate from medicine and religion, would have made no sense at all. Yet none of it would have worked without one humble, invisible trick. Watch the 11 substances closely, and the same technology keeps reappearing, so ordinary it is easy to miss. Lime and ash. Again and again, ancient peoples added an alkaline powder to their drug, and it was never for flavor. It was chemistry. Raising the acidity frees a drug's active compounds so the body can actually absorb them. The coca chewer packs calcite or ash paste against the leaf in the cheek. The betel chewer smears slaked lime into the quid, where it even transforms the drug into a longer-lasting form. The Yopo user, as Humboldt recorded, mixes the snuff with lime burned from snail shells, and this was not casual. At Nanchoc in Peru, there were pits built specifically to heat stone into powdered lime, an entire small industry. At Duyong Cave, a man was buried with a shell still holding his lime. Even ergot, in the great Eleusis debate, depends on separating soluble compounds from poisons in water, another act of chemical processing. The puzzle is how pre-literate people learned this. Nobody had a word for acidity or bioavailability, yet across unconnected cultures, they all discovered that the right mineral additive unlocked the drug. It is the same insight behind treating maize with lime to make it nutritious. This invisible technology forces us to rethink what sophistication means. These were not people who stumbled onto plants by luck. They were running a kind of applied chemistry by trial, observation, and inherited craft. And that sophistication had consequences, because whoever mastered these substances gained something more than a vision. They gained power. Follow the 11 forward in time, and they stop being mere experiences. They become economies. They become instruments of the state. Cacao beans were literally money among the Maya and the Aztecs, counted out for goods and demanded as tribute. Cocoa was folded into the machinery of the Inca Empire, distributed through the labor tax, and reserved as an elite gift. Betel rode the canoes of the Austronesian expansion across the Pacific. Tobacco, after 1492, became one of the great commodities that reshaped the entire global economy. Deeper than trade, these substances underwrote authority itself. The snuff kits of the Andes were prestige objects moving through the networks of the great highland states. At Chavin, the drugs and their fanged iconography were the very engine of religious power, staged inside a temple engineered as a sensory machine of dark galleries and echoing trumpets. At Eleusis, the sacred drink bound together a state cult that endured for 2,000 years. The pattern repeats with unsettling regularity. Access to the altered state was controlled, and control of access was a marker of rank. Reciprocity feasts, fueled by coca and beer, cemented political loyalty. Ritual dosing accompanied even human sacrifice. And as sacred substances slid toward commercial ones, control shifted from priests to merchants to empires, and eventually to the modern legal codes that still fight over these same plants today. To govern the altered mind was always to govern people. For all the chemistry and all the radiocarbon dates, this field is full of open questions, and honesty demands naming them. Was ayahuasca truly ancient, or a recent invention only centuries old? Did the priests of Chavin really use the San Pedro cactus carved all over their temple? Or did the snuff and tobacco found in the tubes do the real work? Is bufotenine even reliably visionary when the experiments contradict each other? Was ergot ever actually brewed at Eleusis? Or have we only proven it was possible? The uncertainties multiply. Did betel chewing begin in the Philippines or the Asian mainland? Was cacao domesticated once or several times? And how many separate times was coca? Were those 4 charred tobacco seeds in Utah a drug or a meal or an accident? Was tobacco truly domesticated before maize? Did anyone actually brew beer at Göbekli Tepe? Or is the chemical signal a trick of nature? And the oldest question of all, first asked in 1953, still stands unanswered. Beer or bread? Which came first? Much of the difficulty is simply that time destroys evidence. Our picture is biased toward the substances that leave hard chemical residues, and blind to the perishable ones that vanished without a trace. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and every few years a new molecular method rewrites the timeline yet again. Line the 11 up together, and a single truth emerges from the pattern. The drive to alter human consciousness is not a modern vice, nor a regional quirk. It is as old as humanity itself, and it appears on every inhabited continent, discovered again and again by peoples who never met. These plants and their chemistry shaped religion, medicine, art, trade, and quite possibly the birth of farming. The oldest specimens on this list, a peyote button, a tobacco seed, a residue of ancient beer, are older than writing, older than cities, older than almost everything we call civilization. The paradox runs through all of it. The same molecules that built cultures also destroyed bodies. The same pursuit produced both the shaman's insight and the modern epidemic. And now the wheel turns once more, as medicine returns to these ancient tools, testing mushroom compounds against depression in the clinic, a straight line from a fox snout pouch in a Bolivian cave to a hospital trial. What the residues finally reveal is the deep continuity of the human mind, its endless curiosity about its own inner states. 12,300 years of documented human relationship with these substances is not a footnote to prehistory. It may be one of its central threads. When we say prehistoric drugs completely altered the course of humanity, it is not a figure of speech. Perhaps the pursuit of the altered mind is part of what made us human in the first place.